Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar event. We're excited to share information about low-income community bonus adder with you today. Please fill out the poll while you're hanging out with us. I'm Danielle. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at CollectiveSun. Thank you for joining us. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our Director of Sales at CollectiveSun. Nicole Withrow brings with her over 2.5 decades of expertise in sales management, contract administration, and project fulfillment. But more than her impressive background, she's a true advocate for nonprofits and has helped over 200 organizations on their solar journey to this day. How are you doing, Nicole?
I am very good. And thank you, Danielle, for the very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Before we get to today's presentation, I do want to remind you that this webinar is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal or tax advice. In today's webinar, we will talk about the low-income community bonus adder basics, including the 4 qualifying categories and when to apply. We'll discuss post-construction risks, talk about new funding solutions available through CollectiveSun, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So let's get started. Who is CollectiveSun? For anyone joining the webinar today who's not familiar with CollectiveSun, we're a solar finance company dedicated to serving nonprofit and tax-exempt organizations. We've been connecting nonprofits with capital for their solar projects since 2011. And while the passing of the IRA brings change to the solar and solar finance industries, as well as more options for nonprofits going solar, our role really remains the same, and that's to help nonprofits navigate their solar journey and to connect them with financing solutions that fit the unique needs of their organization. In the past 6 years, we have partnered with over 200 nonprofit organizations nationwide on their solar financing. Not only are we very proud of that, but as you can imagine, it has also made us very familiar with the challenges nonprofits face going solar, as well as the challenges of the solar installation process itself. Because of that familiarity, we have done our level best to make ourselves an easy button, if you will, for the nonprofit solar journey. At this time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lee Barkin, resident policy guru here at CollectiveSun. Some of you may already be aware that breaking down bill text and policy into digestible terms is actually Lee's superpower. This superpower has been put to the test recently, fine-tuned, honed, if you will, since we embarked on our IRA webinar series, including this tour of bonus adders. Qualifying for the various bonus adders allows for the layering of incentives that can help make your project more affordable. So if saving 30% was exciting, then stacking additional savings opportunities on top of that is potentially mind-blowing and is certainly a game changer for many projects. Our goal today is to continue to help arm folks with resources and engage the collective installer and nonprofit audience we've gathered today in conversation as we all look to evaluate the opportunity to add additional benefit to nonprofit solar projects that qualify for the low-income community bonus adder. Lee, if you would be so kind as to kick off today's conversation on the low-income community bonus adder.
You got it. Thanks, Nicole, for that great intro, and Danielle, as always, for the amazing slides and help with getting all of this organized. Well, here we are, low-income communities bonus adder. It's been a bit of a journey. February, we got the initial guidance, and then towards the end of May, we got the proposed regulations. Then the final regulations came out in August, and now we have something to actually work with and talk about, and there's lots to jump into. But the first thing to kind of wrap your head around is this one's different. Nicole, did you ever watch the one of these is not like the other?
Yes.
Was that Sesame Street? I'm not sure.
No, I think you nailed it.
Is that where that's from?
Yeah, I think so.
This bonus adder is different from all the other bonus adders. It's different from the ITC itself, primarily because it is an allocated credit. And that just means there's a limited number. There's no such restriction with the other bonus adders or the other ITC for that matter. Every single rooftop in the country could go solar, and there's definitions what you have to do to get the ITC. They could all get it. I mean, there's no like cap, if you will. But this particular bonus adder is different. It does have a cap. There's 1.8 gigawatts DC per year that are going to be handed out. allocated, if you will, or awarded to applicants who try to apply for this. So there's a lot of rules, but what makes us different than even the energy community or the domestic content is that those don't have a cap. This is the only one that has a cap. And then, of course, the other difference with relative to our presentation last month, there's less math this month. The domestic credit has a lot of math in it. This one will be less on math, but there's more text. So you're going to have to sort of buckle up and hang in there. But high level, we are talking about solar and wind projects under 5 megawatts. So there's a limitation, 5 megawatts is your cap, but we're just talking solar and wind. You can do battery storage if it's in connection with a solar and wind project. And they've defined in connection with 50% or more of that energy is coming from the renewable sources. That can be a little tricky to calculate and manage and report. So thankfully, they did give us a safe harbor. Don't build your battery more than twice as big as your PV kW rating, and you should be fine. But that's a nice sort of safe harbor. Alternatively, you can use this 50% plus methodology. As always, I do encourage you to read these documents. I put the link to the first one. That is the final regulation. That one's a bit of a doozy, 150 pages. Most of it is just talking about well, why did we decide this? Why did we decide that? We got a comment from here. We got a comment from there. This is how we addressed it. It's really the last 30 pages or so that you're going to find interesting, and kind of directly code specific. So if you get stuck in the middle, just jump to the last 30 pages. And then the second one is the revenue procedure. That one's only 14 pages. It's pretty manageable. It covers kind of all the pieces we're gonna kind of go over here, and those are your reference. If you're confused, of course, always send us an email. And if you need additional specific guidance, if you want to go to the authoritative source, those are the two places to go. All right. Low income community bonus adder is going to raise probably two questions. What kind of projects and what's a low income community? And we're going to talk through those. The first is, we talked solar and wind and battery if it's associated. That's going to be, the scope. But what is a low income community? There's a lot of different ways to tackle this. And here's how Treasury, who, by the way, engaged DOE when they got this, bill text, said, how are we going to figure this out? Let's ask the DOE for help. They're experts. They're really good at this stuff. And so this is where the rules landed. We're going to take 1.8 gigawatts per year, and we are going to allocate those among 4 different categories. So 10%, a 10% bonus adder is going to be in the location for the geography where the project is sited in a low income community. We'll dive into that in a minute, but just know that that's a 10% bonus adder. That's going to have 700 megawatts out of the 1.8 allocated. Located on tribal land, that's also a 10% bonus adder. That has a 200 megawatt allocation. This is per year. Then qualified low income residential building project, big word. When you hear that, just think affordable housing project. Affordable housing project, that's anytime you hear category 3, just think affordable housing project. Category 4, qualified low income economic benefit project. Ooh, another big word. When you hear category 4, just think community solar. And I'll tell you why. It doesn't have to be just community solar, but that's kind of, this is not written anywhere this way, but this is sort of where my head is gravitating towards why this is written this way. So category 1 and 2 are 10% bonus adders. Category 3 and 4 are 20% bonus adders. And they have these allocations, 700, 200, 200, 700. Those add up to 1.8 gigawatts per year that are going to be allocated. Just to make things interesting, they made a change in the final regs and said, okay, category 1, we're going to split that up even further. So that's 700 megawatts we talked about. Well, 70% of that is going to go to residential customers, what we call behind the meter residential customers. That's 490 megawatts, still a 10% bonus adder. The rest, this other 30% or 210 megawatts per year, gets a 10% bonus adder, but that's going to be for projects in front of the meter or non-residential. In this conversation, when we talk about churches and synagogues and schools and boys and girls clubs, we are talking about 1B. So those are going to be non-residential projects behind the meter. We're in this bucket here. So we get 30% of the 700 that's in category 1. That's only 210 megawatts. So if you think about, these could be up to 5 megawatts a piece. This could go very, very quickly. That is not a lot of projects. That's how it was written. There's a lot of unknowns about what categories are going to fill up first and what are not, oversubscribed, undersubscribed. Treasury went to great lengths in several places to say, look, this is what we're doing. We reserve the right to change this. We can move things from one category to another. We'll have to see where the applications all kind of, pan out.
Hey, Lee.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, anytime.
Can you add a little context behind the meter, in front of the meter? Just a little more detail there.
Yeah. So that's basically the point of interconnection for your PV system. Behind the meter is, the customer sided, it's net metering, what traditionally everybody thinks of. In front of the meter is where you're selling electrons directly to the utility. That could be in a bilateral offtake agreement. That could be a feed-in tariff program. It could be a bunch of things. But I'd say if you're a nonprofit, you're almost certainly going to fit into this behind the meter category, and you're going to be non-residential by definition.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. The other definition we all need to wrap our heads around is, what is a low-income community? Now, thankfully, this is not the first time Treasury has had to answer this question of what is a low-income community. So there is a program called the New Markets Tax Credits, which if you're in the tax universe, you've probably heard of before. They already have a definition. This is great. So we can take something off the shelf, and they said, look, just go to 45DE and use that same definition. It's based on percentage of by census tract by census tract, based on poverty levels, based on area median income. But all these things are done. It's a very simple. If you go to a map of New Markets tax credits, it's like the same definition. In addition, Treasury has given us an actual map. So you can go to this URL, and you can, if you click on this little hourglass, spyglass, I think they call it in here, you can type in an address, and you can zoom in, and you can see whether or not an address qualifies. This is great. This is simple. This is qualification and eligibility based on your address and whether or not it's in a particular census tract. That's different than asking somebody, how much money do you make in a year, and providing pay stubs and tax returns, because they're not looking at who the person is, they're looking at what the address is. Now, that's a trade-off. That may have less accuracy, but it increases simplicity. If you're in sales, that's way simpler, because before you even knock on that door or make that phone call, you know whether or not they are technically eligible to apply for this bonus adder. The other sort of accuracy thing is, well, that also means that you can be a low-income individual in a wealthy neighborhood and not qualify. It also means you can have a high-income individual in a low-income who happens to live in a low-income community, and they would qualify. And so just kind of be aware of that dynamic. And we have found, just in practice, a lot of nonprofit projects that don't think they're eligible, like sort of on the concept of an income basis, but they actually are, because it's based on their geography. So do check this, even if you don't think you're eligible. And one little tidbit I just want to point out when you're doing this is to look at the legend. It's this green area that you're looking for. The purple is something different. We're going to talk about the additional selection criteria later on. You're going to see this pop up quite a bit. But additional selection criteria, when you hear that, just think about getting to the front of the line. Like Southwest Airlines has a, what is it called? The A-lister. A-lister. You're on the A-list. You're in the first 15. You get in the front of the line. And so it's basically priority boarding, right? There's provisions that say if you are a priority customer, you get to board first. They delineate that in two separate tests. One of them is based on what kind of organization you are, so the ownership of the organization. Like if you're a nonprofit, you're on the A list, front of the line. The other test is a geography test, and they split it into these two pieces, whether or not you qualify. I'll get into these details later on, but I just wanted to point out this kind of conundrum that you're going to look at these maps and you're going to think like, oh, it's purple, I'm in. That's not what that means. That means had you been eligible, you would have been an A-lister, you would have gotten priority boarding, but you aren't actually eligible. So that is potentially problematic. And I bring this up because this is in contrast to the way that the map was done for energy communities. In energy communities, it's like an OR test where, oh, if you're one of these, you're good, you're in, you're eligible for the energy community bonus adder. If you're this one, which also happens to be a pretty close, what did you say that is? Indigo? What? Help me with my color palette here, Nicole.
Violet.
Violet. I mean, like they look awfully close to each other, but if you're on the energy community bonus map, that's eligible, and if you're on this map, that's not. I mean, it's just a thing to be aware of, because as you're out, trying to figure out, is my nonprofit eligible? Read the fine print and the details sort of carefully. Okay, so that's category one, where most of our attention and our focus is, but I want to touch on the other ones in case you're watching this and there are, other projects that are of interest. Category two is located on tribal land, 200 megawatts. Just if you're on tribal land, you're eligible. So this is fantastic for opportunities where you don't necessarily have to go back to that map to identify. We're very interested in projects that are eligible for category two. So, please reach out to us if this is a geography that you're eligible for. And it's probably the simplest one of the categories. Category three, I mentioned, just think affordable housing. Okay, just a very simple concept. Obviously, it's a residential, rental building. It's what they call a covered housing program. And there's also a requirement that the financial benefits have to be allocated equitably among building participants. There's a lot of details about how that works. But if you're trying to figure out, am I a covered housing building? It's a lot of HUD properties, a lot of others. You can go to this URL, you can see a full list. It's a lot of tiny print on here. Don't try and go through it right now. Just go to that URL, check and see if you're eligible. And that will help you make that determination. Okay, number four. So I said this is community solar. This is an interesting one because it's kind of a new definition, this economic benefit project. It's basically saying at least half of these benefits are being provided to households that meet this criteria. And those households also have to save at least 20%. Well, I guess you could use this in a residential rental building that's not one of the ones in the last slide, like that's possible. But what this seems designed for is really an overlay for community solar, where you have subscribers. And if you can demonstrate that at least 50% of those subscribers meet these thresholds and they're getting this, good deal, 20% off, then you could be getting a 20% bonus adder. That's really exciting for community solar projects, which, we can talk about it at a later date, but is an entirely different, sort of category. But, be aware that that's out there. All right. Well, I said, 50% have to go to folks who meet this criteria. How do you prove that? Well, there's mechanisms that basically say there's two ways to do this. Either there's a category eligibility. So if you can demonstrate that one of these subscribers in the last 12 months qualified for one of these things, you meet the test. Because those things also have eligibility requirements. So Treasury saying, look, if they are in Section 8 or if they are eligible for SNAP, okay, they're also eligible for our criteria as well. In the absence of that, they are saying you need to get pay stubs, tax returns, or some income verification. There is no such thing as a checkbox where you can just tell your subscriber, check here if you're low income. That will not be an accepted form of documentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. After you place it in service, one of the documentation requirements is to identify name and address of the qualifying household and some other information as well. You really do have to have very good record keeping if you want to be eligible for this category 4 and the 20% bonus adder for these community solar projects. One benefit, if you will, to minimize that record keeping obligation is that Treasury is saying once you qualify that status at the time of enrollment, like a community solar subscription, then you're done. You don't have to re-verify that every now and then. There's other things in here on the disqualifications we'll talk about later where you do have a little bit of that, but of this sort of going back and verifying things, but not for this piece. For category 4 eligibility, once you check that at the enrollment point, you are set for that life. Okay, let's breathe. Let's pause a moment. That's a lot of stuff. Takeaways here. We have 4 categories. Located in a low-income community. You go to the map. Are you in a census tract? Like, that's where the project is located. Located on tribal land, where the project is located. Category 3, affordable housing project. That's what kind of building project it is. Affordable housing project, one of those dozens of recognized qualified affordable housing type projects. Number 4, the economic benefit is, think of it as community solar. Who is receiving these benefits? At least half of the folks that are eligible under these criteria, getting at least a 20% savings. Those people don't have to be located in a particular building or in a particular geography. They could just be subscribers onto a community solar kind of array or project located somewhere else. Add those all up, we are at 1.8 gigawatts per year to be allocated. All right, bringing it all back to nonprofit solar projects, which is kind of where a lot of our space is, and I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call, from nonprofits. Just to reiterate again, our category 1, located in a low-income community, split into 2 pieces. Residential got the big chunk there, but non-residential still has 210 megawatts. And if you want to find out, am I eligible in this low-income community definition, go to this map. And this is probably a good pause moment to mention that I just said residential customers.
Yes, you did.
That's interesting, because if you listen to some of our other webinars, you would say, wait a minute, Lee, you told us bonus adders do not apply to residential customers. And that is correct. So the bonus adders were written in section 48 for commercial industrial. They are not in 25D. So a residential customer, you put solar on your house, they are not eligible for a bonus adder, including this one. So how come you're allocating 490 megawatts a year? That is an allocation for a commercial owner, like a third-party owner, like a CollectiveSun, who provides a lease or some other third-party owned structure to a residential customer. So in case you're wondering, yes, CollectiveSun is working on and will be deploying in fourth quarter a residential lease for LMI communities. So if that's something that is of interest, please do reach out to us, and I'm sure there'll be more webinars and fun conversations around that rollout. But that is why you sort of see this here. Please don't be confused into thinking that, like, if you're a solar installer, you're talking to a residential customer in an LMI community, if they buy the system with cash and purchase it from a solar installer, they will lose eligibility for all the bonus adders. It has to be done through a third-party ownership structure like CollectiveSun is offering. Okay, so now moving on to the application requirements, and we'll talk about documentation and attestations that need to be made. If you're applying, you only get to submit once. You can't submit once in category 4 and once in category 2. Like you get one application per facility for a specific allocation year. Now, if you don't get selected, you could technically you could like apply again, right? As nonprofits, we're also used to this grant making process that are sort of like bake-offs or beauty contests. Like we fill out these forms and we hope they pick us. This one is a little different. It's more of an allocation that, like, if you meet all these eligibility requirements, they're distributing them, but it's more of a rolling basis, first come, first serve, which we'll get into those details in a couple minutes. But if you don't get selected, it's not like not getting a grant and, should I really apply the next year? It's all about timing. So you absolutely should apply in the next year for reasons that'll make more sense in a couple slides. And the other thing is, these are signed under penalty of perjury dated by the applicant. I've said this over and over. Do not lie to the IRS. That is a terrible, terrible thing. Do not make that mistake, and be vigilant about accuracy. Make sure you're doing things properly. You're filling out the forms correctly. You just don't want to run into issues with that later on. All right, so there's a lot of text here, and I don't normally, like to read from slides, but I'm going to try and do a little bit of walkthrough here just so you can make sense of this and then come back to it later. I don't expect everyone to absorb all these at the moment, but if you're a nonprofit solar project, you're probably in this category here of behind the meter, under a megawatt, smaller project. They've delineated the rules for under a megawatt and over a megawatt. And the first thing you need to know is you have to have a signed lease or a signed, something. Even if you're a buyer of the facility, you have to have a signed agreement. But that's kind of it. That's a pretty low bar. Having an executed interconnection agreement is not a requirement. So basically, if you signed your lease agreement, you're kind of, you check that box, which is a really low bar for small projects. For big projects, not so much. If you're over a megawatt, there's a lot of other stuff that you're going to have to do.
Yeah, just by curiosity, Lee, I mean, I know you have only just begun to reveal some of these requirements, but why do you think there are so many requirements in this application process? I mean,
yeah, I'm glad you asked that actually kind of early, because there is a theme here, and let's see if everyone watching kind of picks up on this. They're really trying to filter out those projects that are not going to make it, right? They're looking for pretty vetted, projects. If you're going to get like a big allocation, they want to make sure it's going to happen. They don't want to hand out a bunch of allocations and then they don't get built. So the theme here, as you hear all these sort of rules and attestation, is sort of like, yeah, you have to have a pretty mature project, especially for the bigger allocations. But I kind of like this carve out, under a megawatt behind the meter. It's saying, look, you don't need site control. You don't need, a lot of the other requirements. And that's helpful for this particular category. But I think the overall sort of broader picture, like why is this so complicated? They're just trying to figure out like what's really going to happen. And they're asking this question because DOE thinks they're going to be overrun with applications. That's sort of their starting point. As you read through the full regs, they're building out all these rules in a way that's saying like, oh my gosh, we're going to get so many people trying to get on this plane. It's going to be crazy. And that's in contrast to the way the bill text was written. The bill text says things like, oh, if they're not all allocated, they'll roll over to the next year. It's kind of interesting. So nobody really knows how many applications they're going to get, how oversubscribed or undersubscribed things are going to be. But this is a super generous benefit, right? Another 10 or 20% ITC. So we don't know. So DOE, I think, is wisely kind of taking, a cautionary approach and going, look, we only want stuff that's pretty fully baked, like pretty mature, that is going to happen. And I think they're trying to avoid people just kind of flipping in an application, it may or may not get built, and then an allocation is, kind of goes unused. regardless of any of these categories, there's still a bunch of stuff that applies to anybody. So this first one, I want to point out because it has some tricky language in here saying that you received all of your federal, state, tribal, local, non-ministerial permits. Don't get caught up on that. Building permits, electrical permits, not in this category. Those are not non-ministerial permits. What they're talking about here is like, I need a conditional use permit. I need a community meeting that has to happen, and they need to rezone something. And there's a big multi-year process, and that may or may not ever like get off the ground. They're trying to protect against like those projects, take care of all that stuff first and then apply. But if you're a nonprofit, you just need like an agreement to buy the solar system or lease the solar system. You don't have to have your interconnection application. You don't need to have your building permits. You don't need to have any of that stuff done. It's a very light lift for that particular sort of segment. Everybody else, if you're doing front of the meter, like a big community solar project in category 4, or you're doing a very large behind the meter over a megawatt, like this stuff is going to potentially be an issue for you, and you'll want to pay attention to those items. Other things are pretty obvious and straightforward, like, comply with all federal, state, local laws, consumer protections, safety obligations, do not engage in unfair or deceptive acts or practices. That should be very easy to attest to when you're completing your application. There's some, question here about sizing of facilities. It notes here that's in accordance with applicable state and local requirements. Your NEM program is probably already going to have a restriction or limitation. So this is probably already being looked at. I wouldn't be too concerned, but just be aware, like there's a lot of different things that they're asking applicants to create a attestation for. If you look at this from a category perspective, documentation is going to be a little bit different. So I mentioned category 3 has to be a eligible affordable housing project. Well, if you're in category 3, you're going to have to demonstrate you're in one of those categories. For everybody else, non-issue. Same thing. I didn't really get into category 3 and 4 too much, but be aware there's this benefit sharing statement. You're going to have that for your category 3. And then here we go again for additional selection criteria. So remember, that's our A-listers, right? People who are first 15 to board the plane. For those folks, you're going to have to document and demonstrate that if you're using that under, in this case, the ownership criteria, like if you're trying to get an A-list for being a nonprofit, you're going to have to provide a document showing you're a nonprofit, and so on and so forth. And then the attestation requirements: are you on the map? Is your location in an eligible low-income community under Section 45D? Like that's something you're going to have to attest to, that you looked it up on a map, and yes, you are eligible. That again is not applicable for 3 and 4. Disclosures, all of these consumer protections, like yes, everyone's going to have to do those. I mentioned under category 4, the community solar bucket, that at least half the benefits have to go to a qualified household, and they have to have this 20% bill credit. Well, that's only category 4. So don't worry about that if you're category 1. And then again, these additional selection criteria, the A-listers, if you're qualifying under that second pathway of the geography, then you have to prove that you're in one of those geographies. All right. So, wow, a lot of documents, a lot of attestations. There's like a lot of stuff going on here, but at some point you submit an application and that all gets done. I want to call to everyone's attention that the first 30 days, and they wrote this for every year, not just the first year. So it's kind of interesting that they're saying when they open the floodgates, the first 30 days, any application received in those 30 days are all treated as if they're received at the same date and time. So whether you submit it on the first day or the 29th or 30th day, you are all sort of grouped together and treated as if you all applied at the same time. So when we say first come, first serve, it's kind of segmented. It's first come, first serve, but in the first 30 days, you're all the first. And that gives us a little bit of time. That creates some flexibility. I don't know if anyone on the call has been in other programs where it opens at 8 a.m. It's not like Ticketmaster where you have to be there right at 8 a.m. to get the best seat. They're actually being a little helpful here, and they're saying 30 days. If it's oversubscribed, then there's sort of a lottery mechanism, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. After the first 30 days, if there are unallocated credits, it's just first come, first serve. It's kind of a rolling application. Could that, fully subscribe in a day, a week, a month, 6 months, 9 months, 11 months, or not at all and roll over to the next year? We are all going to find out together in the next 12 months how that process goes. DOE has already sort of said that we think this is going to roll into 2024. It's the first year, and here we are. It's September, it's not even open yet. So I think they're anticipating the 2023 allocations are going to spill over a little bit. Then 2024 allocations will somehow open up. Stay tuned for that. We'll definitely keep you posted. If you do make a mistake, they might reach out to you. And there's a mention of a 21-day business day, a cure period where you could fix something. And a little minutia, if you're one of those detail-oriented people that wonders about the last KW. So if there is 1 KW left in that allocation, there's 700 megawatts that were allocated and 1 KW left, and you put in your application for 100 KW, you're going to get 1. So they're literally going to dole out. They've defined a very specific mechanism, and they're saying yep, that last person in line will get a partial serving of whatever is left over. And do keep in mind that the DOE is making a recommendation to Treasury, but it's actually Treasury that's going to make the notification. And they even threw in a thing that said we can disagree with DOE if we want to. And just because DOE says it's okay, they are the ultimate authority. So keep that in mind, that in the sort of order of this process, it's Treasury that is ultimately empowered by the bill and by Congress. They've engaged DOE to help them with these technical sort of eligibility questions. The recommendation goes back to Treasury, then Treasury will make the notification. And I mentioned before, if you're not selected, just reapply. It has nothing to do with, they didn't like the, type of building or the anything about the project. It's strictly there is an allocated credit. This is the first time we've seen a structure like this. It is new. So please do reapply if you're still eligible. Okay, let's talk about our A-listers and how you get onto the A-list. This is very important. 2 different pathways. One pathway is an ownership criteria. So that's basically, who you are as the applicant. You could be tribal enterprise, Alaska Native Corporation. There's this renewable energy cooperative. It's a new definition. And that is a company that serves low-income communities, and it's under 10 full-time employees, less than $20 million in revenue, but they've been around for at least 2 years or has deployed 100 kW in low-income communities. So there's a little bit of a carve-out here. If you're, a company that's kind of engaged in this work, you might be able to qualify under this definition. And then the last one for all of us nonprofits that are a 501c3, you meet this definition and you check the box for the ownership criteria. And so you are de facto, A-lister. The second selection criteria is geographic. And there are 2 definitions and 2 different kind of maps around the country. The first is the Persistent Poverty County, the PPC. And the other is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. There's a lot of EJ maps. California has theirs, other states have theirs. This is the one they're saying is authoritative. So if you are in the meet the ownership criteria, you have met an additional selection criteria. If you're in the geographic, meet one of these 2, you're in the geographic criteria, you might be in both. So you are the double A-lister. You will get supreme priority. But at minimum, if you meet one of these, you're in this priority position and they're reserving 50% of each category for folks who are kind of in this, meet these criteria. And for folks on this call, being a nonprofit, that is a big advantage. And technically, CollectiveSun Foundation, which offers our leases as a 501c3, we are in this bucket as well. So if you were to do a lease with CollectiveSun, you're A-lister by definition. Okay, so that's sort of how those priority categories get selected. Now, once you place in service, they want more information. So there's another attestation that you're going to have to do to go back, and you could get disqualified. And they went out of their way to say if you're disqualified, there's no administrative appeal. So be careful with these things. The obvious, there's some obvious ones like, okay, you applied for 4 megawatts and then you built something that was 6. Okay, you're going to be disqualified. But there's also one that drops. If you drop, you say, I'm going to build, 4 megawatts, and then you build 500 kW, like you lost your allocation. And that's an interesting one because I think it's back to this theme of discouraging hoarding of allocations. Try to be accurate. Don't sort of shoot the moon. Know your project, know what you're actually going to build, and apply for that number. If you no longer satisfy the financial benefits requirement, so all those rules that I talked about, well, you had these intentions when you started, but then by the time you place in service, things changed, you could be disqualified. You have 4 years to build this thing. So if it takes more than 4 years, you're disqualified. And then if you got your award because you made a claim that you're on the A list, and now you're no longer on the A list by the time you place it in service, like, I don't know, you lose your 501c3 status, or for some reason, you no longer meet the same criteria that you did at the time you applied, you could lose your bonus adder allocation in those circumstances. And then the most important one, if you remember one slide from today's presentation, please remember this one. It is all about timing. So they are saying that if you place your project in service before you get the allocation, you're out. So you have to place your project in service after being awarded the allocation. If you're in the middle of a project right now and you apply and then you place it in service before you hear back from them, you're going to disqualify yourself because you have to be placed in service after the award of the capacity limitation is the term they use in the final regs, but after you get your allocation. So think about that as you're sort of timing your projects and as you're placing in service, and the difference of 1 day could be the difference of 10 or 20% bonus adder. Just kind of be aware of that gotcha. And then after construction, any kind of ITC has recapture risk. So even if we're not talking about this bonus adder, there's ways to have ITC recaptured. If it stops making power, the IRS can claw back ITC. That's nothing new. But there's these other layered components on here that you need to be aware of if you got the bonus adder. So if you didn't provide the financial benefits that you said you would, you could have a clawback of the bonus adder. That wouldn't trigger clawback of the 30%, but it could trigger a clawback of the 10% or 20%. The building stops being a covered housing program. So this is category 3, affordable housing. If you got this bonus adder and then you got it because you're a category 3 and you're a HUD project, and then for some reason you're no longer a HUD project, recapture period's 5 years, they could take that back. They could take the bonus adder back. So that is different than category 4, where the individuals who are subscribers have to be eligible and verified at the time of the subscription, but they're covered, for there's no recapture on this piece for category 4, but category 3 there is. So if it stops being a covered program, you could lose that. And then if the facility increases to more than 5 megawatts, I mean, it's a weird outlier. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But if you were somebody who was gaming the system and you thought, oh, I'll put in 5 megawatts, get my bonus adder, then I'm going to add 30 more megawatts, like, yeah, don't do stuff like that. I mean, it's not going to work. And so bringing this all together, you've heard like, 30 minutes here of details and rules. And this is kind of the takeaway slide. Like, what do I do now? Like, all right, I've heard all this stuff. There's these bonus adders and there's different categories. And all right, well, DOE says they're going to get 100,000 applications. And I just said, anybody who applies in the first 30 days is going to be treated as if they applied on the same day. So that tells you, get your application in, right? The bar is very low for a nonprofit who is going to do a behind the meter project under a megawatt. This is your typical, churches and schools and boys and girls clubs and YMCAs. Like these projects have a pretty low bar. So get the application in. Just get the application in and get your place in line, get the allocation. Now, who is responsible for doing all this work? It depends who the taxpayer is, who the project owner is. If you're getting a loan, you, the nonprofit, you are the owner of the system. All of this is your responsibility. So you have to submit all of this and take care of this work. If it's a lease, we, CollectiveSun Foundation, we are responsible for all this joyous extracurricular activity, which we actually do like, by the way. We kind of nerd out on this stuff. So tax filing's never a burden for us. And that would be our responsibility, but we still have to get that lease agreement signed. Like, that's the bar, right? And we can kind of do the rest. And by now you have to be asking yourself the question, when is this portal going to be open? Because they've said that it's going to be, in the end of 2023, but DOE came out and said, we will tell you in early September when the portal will open. So there will be a date to know when the date is going to happen. And we've been tracking this, clicking refresh every day. In fact, we set the date of this September 20th, thinking, well, early September, then we'll be able to tell you, our audience, like, it's opening on X date and get ready and make sure you get it in the first 30 days. But if you go to the DOE website, as of an hour ago, it says that the date and time the application portal will open for registration and application submission and other resources will be announced in early September. So I apologize to our viewers. We got our timing off, but I beg your indulgence. We will let you know if you're on our newsletters when exactly that date happens. But I imagine this is pretty imminent. You could go there tomorrow. It might, the announcement really could come out at any time. And the announcement is to tell you when the portal will open. And then once the portal opens, we have 30 days in order to get this done. So our takeaway here is get everything ready, get your ducks in a row, as they like to say, and get your plans in motion. If you're going to do this is the time to get all of these things done. So let's transition now and talk about those solutions. How do you get this done, Nicole?
Right. I love talking about solutions. Through the Sun for All Solar Fund, CollectiveSun offers solar loans and leases to nonprofits nationwide. Just for example, some of our recent Sun for All projects include San Diego State University, United Way of San Diego County, Habitat for Humanity. All right, let's talk about the Sun for All solar loan. So this loan was designed for nonprofits by nonprofit professionals with interest rates that are based on community impact or the valuable work and services nonprofits provide in their community rather than their credit score. So that's pretty cool. The loan features a payment holiday during construction, so no payments while the system's being built, no prepayment penalties, and no collateral beyond the solar equipment itself. So that's also pretty unique compared to a lot of other loan opportunities that we see out there. We designed the loan for organizations that intend to take advantage of direct pay. So by its very design, the Sun for All solar loan is direct pay ready. What does that mean? So we provide 100% of the installation cost. You've got a significant direct pay tax rebate coming up at a future date, but your installer is not likely to accept an IOU while you wait for that rebate to come. So you need a loan that provides that 100% of the installation costs. So the Sun for All loan achieves that by providing gap or short-term financing for that anticipated rebate amount, long-term financing for the remaining installation costs, and we roll that into one simple loan with a set payment. And when you receive the rebate, you remit that to us to pay down the loan. The term length on the Sun for All solar loan is up to 10 years. Current interest rates start at 4.99%. So when you choose the Sun for All solar loan, your organization will own the equipment, be responsible for negotiating your contract with your installer, provide your own project management, be responsible for timely filing all associated direct pay tax filings. We just talked about the low-income community bonus adder. All that stuff is the responsibility of the owner. In this case, will be the nonprofit. Lee, any pearls of wisdom you want to add on the loan, or should I go on to the lease?
Keep going. We're running on time.
Powering through. Okay. We call the Sun for All solar lease the easy button solution for a reason. So we do the heavy lifting. We make sure that the project is built and generating savings for the nonprofit before we get paid. So when you choose the Sun for All solar lease, we do the work to select and vet a qualified installer, handle installer contract negotiations and management, take care of construction management, secure lien waiver and releases to protect the nonprofit, manage construction payments to contractors, subs, and material suppliers. There are no lease payments due from the nonprofit till the system's fully installed and generating savings, no application fees, setup fees, fees of any kind, no hassle for the nonprofit dealing with tax credits, understanding direct pay tax filings, or any IRS filings. The lease has a 20-year term with a simple monthly lease payment and a 1.9% escalator annually. Early buyout options are available if that's of interest. Full operations and maintenance are included. So you've heard kind of the basic overview of the loan and the lease, but how do you make sense of it all? We start with some basic practical questions. Do you have in-house construction management expertise? Are you comfortable bearing construction risk? Are you comfortable bearing long-term ownership risk? You know, it's worth mentioning that there are, of course, additional considerations when you're comparing a direct purchase with a lease. It's not an apples to apples comparison. And it's more akin to, do we buy a lawnmower and mow the lawn ourselves, that kind of DIY approach? Or do we hire a landscaper and let an expert do that work for us, that easy button solution like the lease? No one's going to know better than you which solution is the right fit for your organization. Nonprofit solar financing is not a one-size-fits-all conversation. Because of that, we're super excited that we have options for you to choose from. I think we better open it up to Q&A.
I will add real quick.
Yes, please.
So these are construction projects. A lot more can go wrong than if you just have a lawnmower. Your grass might look funny for a week. But conceptually, you know, this depends a lot about the culture of your nonprofit and your comfort level with all of those risks. And I think it's best just have a conversation, you know, talk with other people who have gone solar about what their experience has been. Talk with us. We can coach you and help, you know, navigate through that process and understand what are the right questions to be asking and what are the potential risks. But I don't think there's a wrong choice. The wrong choice is to sit on your hands and not go solar. Like ultimately, you know, whatever makes sense in your organization to get your project to advance, like that's the right choice for you.
Great. All right. Some questions. Lee, can these adders be stacked?
Yes, bonus adders are stackable. So inside of low-income communities, it's 10 or 20. So you only get one of those, but that can be stacked with the 10% in energy community or the 10% in domestic content.
Great. Is this only for nonprofits or both nonprofits and for-profits? And I'm not sure if this question is about the loan and lease offerings or about the bonus adders.
Yeah, so you'll notice our approach is pretty nonprofit centric, but no, there's nothing in this bill or bonus adder. It's not restricted to nonprofits per se. There's just a lot of nonprofits are probably in this audience, but a for-profit, you know, commercial office building somewhere could absolutely, they would be, you know, behind the meter, non-residential. They're going to compete in that 210 megawatts. But that's why we have an advantage as a nonprofit, because we're going to be in that A-lister group. That's why I have such a sense of urgency. I think the folks who get onto that first 30 days have a higher likelihood than people who come in at month, 8 or 9 down the road, or who are commercial entities. They really have a big advantage.
Perfect. Is there a sunset date that we know of for the bonus adders?
No, so this is the great thing about the IRA bill. We love to pick apart pieces that are frustrating, but if you take a step back, this is a 10-year program, and it could actually go longer depending on if certain thresholds are met. This is a long-term opportunity. So we have a very long runway for all of these things. And that's something to be very excited about and very grateful for, that this, was provided and passed, in our country.
Excellent. Do you have a moment to give more explanation on the two purples?
Yeah. So that was like that's the A-lister, right? The additional selection criteria. There were 2 ways to get on there. One is the ownership, who you are, like you're a nonprofit. The other was the geography. So those 2 other purple areas were the 2 ways you can qualify under the geography arm of that eligibility structure. So there was the PPC, the persistent poverty eligibility, and that's one kind of defined definition and map. And the other was the CEJST, which has a different map. That's the economic justice, the environmental justice, specific map that was published. And they don't necessarily overlap 100%. So you can have an environmental justice community that may or may not be exactly in a low-income community. And that's why it's a little bit tricky, because you have there's 2 different ways to get an A-list, and one of those ways has 2 different qualifications, and you might be in one of those qualifications and be eligible for the priority boarding, but you might not meet the basic eligibility of being in a low-income community. And I just want to call that out, because it's a little bit of an anomaly, and I don't want people to be disappointed when they go to a map and go, oh, we're on the map, and then they get out to construction, they base their financing on it, and then they get out later and discover, oh, we have a deficit now, there's a shortfall, we actually weren't eligible.
Let's see. So if our address is in white and we're not eligible and shouldn't apply, for example, we have 2 buildings, one is in green, the other is in white.
Yeah, there's a bunch of rules around this. I'd say call us offline, share your addresses. We'll give you more feedback. But again, we're not providing tax or legal advice, but happy to provide educational information. But basically, and there's also outlier use cases, like we're on half and half, in which case there's a 50% rule that's applicable. So it's going to depend on where the projects are, where the meters are, and a bunch of other facts and circumstances. But I mean, chances are, and don't rely on this without checking further, but you maybe end up being eligible on one building and not eligible on another building. That could be a possibility. But very facts and circumstances specific, and feel free to reach out with questions.
Excellent. I'm going to do, I think, 1 or 2 more. Do I understand correctly that you should apply for this after contract, but we don't have to wait for completion?
Correct. Do not wait until the project is completed, and be aware that if you put the project in completion before you get an award announcement, you're going to become ineligible. So don't do that either. So your sort of status or sort of states of operation here, you want to get the contract signed, you want to submit the application as soon as that portal is open within the first 30 days. Then you want to get the notice of award before you place in service. In theory, there could be some overlap, like you start construction, just don't finish construction and place it in service. Because if you do, prior to receiving that award, you'll be deemed ineligible, and that you'll lose the bonus adder.
All right. Can we do 1 more?
Sure.
If your project is in a new market tax credit tract, but your address is not in purple on the DOE map, question mark.
Okay, send me a note.
Okay.
I would love to dive into this one, but it's very facts and circumstances specific. And yes, we're going to find lots of unique outlier cases that are going to create very interesting sort of, project circumstances. And it sounds like you have one, but send me a note and we'll talk through, because those definitions are specific, and we can, help you track that down. But I'm afraid we're running out of time. So
A few parting words.
yes, please.
Registrants for today's webinar will receive a follow-up email containing a recording of today's presentation, along with a slide deck, Q&A transcript. So the questions we didn't get to live today, we'll do our best to get to those and provide the answers in a transcript. If you've missed the prior webinars in this series, you can go to CollectiveSun.com, about us, events. Thank you, Danielle, for your work putting the recap together. One more in the series of bonus adders in the bonus adder tour. I believe that's October 19th. So we'll do the Energy Communities bonus adder at that time. Thanks, everyone.